Let's see here. My name is Yano. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Marketbale Games, which doesn't really mean much because the first game we released under this company was SlaytheSpire, and that was made by 2 people.
My name is Sebastien Bernard. I'm a game developer, game designer. I do work in a company. Actually, it's a one company. It's a company I built, which is called Checkmate Games.
Hey, I'm Remy Devaux. I'm co-founder of Pancake Delicia, and we made Shotgun King, the final Checkmate. At the time of recording this, we've made 17 different games. No, 16 actually, and we have a 17 on the way. And yeah, we just make a lot of games. We used to make a game a month. Now we mostly make a game a month.
Oh yeah, Leonard Menchiari. That's my name. I guess I'm at my 4th or 5th project. I worked on Trek to Yomi. Came up with an idea, made a demo, learned Unreal, pitched it to Devolver. They liked it. We got a team together, which is Flame Wahog, and then I learned how to, work with bigger teams, which is a whole other set of.
I'm Pierre Bouvy. I am the producer, one of the producers of As the Falls on Xbox and very soon PS4, PS5 at Internal Studio in London.
So I'm Jose Fernando Gracia, and I work in Most Proud Games, which is a Panamanian game dev company. And our most recent game is Bug Fables. I was in charge of making the puzzles, writing the dialogue, some character design, handling the Twitter account, handling the Discord server, and a bunch of other annoying stuff that you don't realize you have to do until the game comes out and no one on your team has to do it.
Okay, so my name is Heidy Motta. I am the operations manager of Extremely OK Games, which is an indie game dev company. We are really small, basically just 6 people. And then, what was the other question I already forgot? Oh, the recent game. We are working on Earthblade. We haven't released it yet. So the recent game would be still Celeste.
So my name is David Logan. I'm the CEO of Akupara Games. I've been in the industry for about 13 years now at this point. I started off developing games with a title called Whispering Willows, and then I got into publishing games when I had experiences with publishers that weren't quite up to the standards I was hoping for.
I'm Matthew Davis. I'm the co-founder of Subset Games. I'm primarily a programmer designer for the studio. I say studio, but there's only 3 of us full-time right now. And we made FTL and Into Breach.
Game design.
What is your approach towards designing the movement inside that cells?
The most important and definitely the most important decision in this game whatsoever in the whole development process was to say that Dead Cells was not a platformer game. It was an action game. It was a combat game, but it was not a platformer. So when you say that, and when you accept that, and everyone agrees with that, it actually leads to lots of strange decisions, but actually that actually makes the game better because it's more focused on what it's actually about. And in Dead Cells, when you decide to say it's not a platformer game, so suddenly you don't have to fail a jump. So that's why you are grabbing everywhere, you are jumping, and it's really smooth, and you are never stopped by anything. Actually, you have pretty much no trap in the game, except in a few specific levels. You don't have spikes, lava floors, or stuff like that. You do have really a few specific parts of the game with that, but most of the time it's not about that, and it's really everything about combat. So in this case, yes, definitely understanding what the game is about, and getting rid of everything which is in the way, like platforming, typically. So when you have that in mind, you're making everything in your movements to be in line with that. So climbing walls, jumping on platforms, and jumping between platforms it's very different from making like a manic platformer, like I don't know, Super Meat Boy or Celeste or this type of games. You're making a game where you should never fail because of platforming. So you're making everything you can to make sure that the player will probably succeed into doing everything, because it's not the point of.
I want to ask, like, if Ido doesn't have.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I
You
actually
said
didn't have a question
Dead
planned.
Cells, you were working mostly on gameplay and balance, which I feel like some of the game's strongest points. And I wanted to ask, what's your approach to balance? Like, let's say you have a specific weapon or a specific enemy, and you're saying, like, first of all, how do you catch that there's some balancing needed to do there, and then how do you go about it?
I'm not sure my answer will be great, but
It
for me,
works, so I think it's great.
My main way, I'm really bad at, I'm not really great at mathematics. So I like to fill spreadsheets, but at some point it's really difficult for me to see fun through numbers, to see if this weapon will just be fun, if it does like an extra DPS or whatever. So most of the time I really don't care about really actual values. Most of the time I just make a fun weapon, whatever it is. And I'm focusing on the TTK metric, which is time to kill. It's something that you will probably see in other titles. But time to kill is really a very easy way to balance things. The idea is in Dead Cells, I remember it was 1 second, 3 seconds, or 6 seconds. It's now a little bit lower than that, but basically killing any enemy in the game should be 1 second, 3 seconds, or 6 seconds. And depending on your approach, if you're taking a risky approach, like something that you probably get hit in return, it's 1 second to kill. So if you are making a weapon which is like difficult to use but very powerful, so it's 1 second, 1 second TTK. And if you're making like an auto turret that will kill enemies for you, it's more like 6 seconds. In the end, it's actually 1 and 3 seconds. We gave up on the 6 because it was just too long. But the idea is that I don't care much about balancing of weapons. If you have anything, it's very natural, for example, to have a slow, huge weapon to do lots of damage because the TTK is 1, while having like a very fast sword and you are slashing enemies very quickly, it's more TTK free. Something in between, but in the end, the DPS is like a calculated value based on TTK. So you don't care much about actual DPS. You're just thinking about, is it a difficult weapon to use? So yeah, so you should be rewarded to kill enemy faster with that. If it's like a very chill weapon like bows and turrets and weapons like that, it will be slower. So the game overall will be slower, but that's it. That's your playstyle. Who am I to disagree with that? So it's really just balancing everything through TTK.
So to summarize it, you first start by making it fun, and then you lower or up it based on like a metric that is universal to the whole game in a sense. Because TTK is something that you do all the time.
Yeah,
that's cool.
The advantage of that is that you don't really have much to observe. You really don't think in DPS terms. You just think in is it as fast to use this weapon than this weapon? Is it fair? Okay, that's it.
I'd like to ask about a difficult challenge either you personally had or you and Jay had, and how you overcame it.
It's just probably not going to be a satisfying answer. It's just a design problem that we solved. It's in Into the Breach, because it's very deterministic. The enemy's attacks are predetermined. Your attacks always hit and always do the same amount of damage. You end up in a scenario where you get a turn that you can't win. Like, you can't avoid the damage. It's inevitable. And because of the core structure of the game, and with the health bar and the way that we actually ended up making the game function, was that would mean you could find yourself in a guaranteed loss scenario, but you haven't technically lost yet. Like, you're on a turn, you know when you hit that end turn button, you're going to lose, and there's nothing you can do. And I think that is a horrible state to put the player in. And that is a state that we really struggled with, because the core design philosophy of the game was that deterministic nature. That we're going to reduce the die rolls, reduce the randomness. FTL was a huge random number generator design. So many misses and randomness and random events and random things that could happen. Well, Into the Breach, we really focused it in and wanted to make a much more controlled experience. But then the only thing that could solve that problem was to completely buck that core design philosophy and add in the power grid defense concept with you have like a 10% chance of avoiding damage. And so that little, like, you have a 10% chance of nothing happening made the game work in that it let you escape those completely guaranteed fail states. There was always a chance that no matter how dire things are in the breach, you're still probably going to lose when you hit end turn, but at least you can hope and watch that turn and experience the full narrative that you've created without it just being this miserable hit end turn experience. And then the 10% of the time that it works and you don't die also gives that player that amazing moment of like barely scratching through. And so I think it's an interesting example in that it is a compromise that had to be made for the kind of the core design philosophy of the game, but it was invaluable to being able to make the game function. And that without it, I don't think the game would work as well.
I have a question about, like, just for the record, I've played, I mean, you said earlier that something about making players like happy, and made me think that I've like played SlaytheSpire for like 600 hours and I've been very happy. And I wanted to ask about, like, not as in a bad way, but SlaytheSpire is like extremely addictive. What would you say went into making it that addictive?
I see. What makes the game addictive? That's a very complex question. I'm
saying,
not really a big fan of
I'm saying,
hard
like,
games.
in the development process, what are the elements that made it like that way?
I see. I mean, it's hard for me to say exactly because I don't get to play it and experience the same like emotional journey of becoming hyper invested into the game. It's just impossible just because I made the game. There's a lot of things about other games that I feel make me stop playing those games. And I wanted to, each time I run into those kind of issues, I kind of try to like design a solution in my mind. One of them is that there's not an ever increasing challenge. Once there's no more challenges for me to do in a game, I just stop playing. Generally, when you get all the achievements in a game, it's kind of like, I guess I finished the game. And so I was like, oh, we should add a system that makes it more endless and more difficult over time. And for some reason, in our release timeline, our release roadmap, we said there's going to be an endless mode. And in my mind, that's what I was thinking of what endless meant, was like, you can keep playing the game, not you keep playing one run forever. And Anthony just wrote endless because he thought in roguelike games, everybody expected an endless mode where they're like, oh, how far can I take this single deck? That was not what I was thinking at all. So I was like, I have a proposition for endless mode, Anthony. And so I like made this big document about the Ascension system and I sent it over and he was like, this sounds great. Like, what's this for? And I was like, what do you mean? It's for the endless mode. He's like, I don't think that's what people think endless mode is. So I was like, well, I think this is a great system and I want to test it out. So I'm just going to implement it. So I implemented it. And then we made an endless mode as well because Anthony thought that wouldn't placate some of the people who thought that's what endless mode was. And that mode kind of sucks. So we just kind of hid it under like custom mode. In terms of people playing for a long time, I think that's one of the things that makes people play more than just like beating the game with all characters. There's like a little bit more, right? It's like a little bit harder. Like, and it's like this it's like competitive, even though it's a single player game. But you're mostly
you're competing against your past self. It's awesome.
Exactly. You're competing against yourself too. And then you can kind of remember emotionally how you did it. And you beat it again. You're like, this time it was easy. Like, am I getting better? Like, there's only one way to find out. We just keep playing. And then, so that's one factor. And the other factor that I spend a lot of time studying is removing friction from video games. And it's like very, very difficult to define what that means. There are a lot of elements. One is the game is very easy to obtain and run. So that would be the game size is small. It runs relatively quickly. And even like if there is like a logo splash, an unskippable logo splash adds an incredible amount of friction to me. Like I remember about a year and a half ago, I played the new Forza game. And it's like, I have to open the Xbox, whatever, Xbox Game Pass. So that's not like an auto startup for me. So I have to open that. I click on the Forza thing. If I had to download it, it's like 50 gigabytes or whatever. It opens. There's like 10 million credits. It like asks me to sign something. It's like look at these new promotions. You got a new car. It's like I don't want that. Like that's not what I want. It's like when you wake up and you just want your coffee. You don't want your coffee to tell you how awesome it is. You don't want it to give you advertisements. You don't want it to change. You just want to drink your coffee. Like you want it to be made exactly the same way. You want it to taste the same way. And it's a little different though, you know? You can never always make the coffee the same way. And it's like, and you enjoy your coffee. It's kind of like, I want a comfortable game. In SlaytheSpire, you just run the game. The very top option is continue or new game. You're like, I want to play SlaytheSpire. I want it to feel comfortable. And then I want to run the game. You start it, you go. There's the speed and transition time between every menu option is like, it's like pretty much zero. It's like all visual. You just go. But
what else created friction in your playtesting and stuff that you smoothed out?
Oh my gosh, we talk about words all the time. I mean, language is a very complex thing, as you probably. I mean, that's like language is kind of the reason we have wars. Like that's how bad it is, I think. So descriptions we spend an incredible amount of time fixing. Friction would be like a button being too small, a transition being too long, the sound effect not being the right pitch. It's just like everything that makes the game like a little bit more unpleasant, we have to like smooth out. It's like wrinkles in the carpets. That kind of feedback, unless you specifically point out examples of those kinds of issues existing in the game, your playtesters will likely not point it out. Especially if they're like friend playtesters who are not professionals. They will not know to be like, is this worth bringing up? Like, is it worth bringing up that like this button just appears instead of like flies in smoothly? And the answer is no, they will not tell you. They don't. Generally, when you play a game and you think about filing feedback, you're kind of thinking about it from a macro level, even like the speed of which like a pause screen opens and closes. Like you're playing something, you get interrupted, you just press escape and then you press save and exit. You just muscle memory, just quit the game too.
So you basically just work, like you could have the core system and you'd work on it repeatedly and slowly introduce new things.
Yeah, exactly. It's really how it works. The only thing that I didn't do like that, it was what I call the director of the game, which was it's really inspired by Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. The way they manage their AI. Basically, they have some kind of AI, which is the game master of the game. Basically, it's an AI that observes the game playings and Left 4 Dead, and it says it would be cool to have this guy who is in this other room to throw lots of zombies at this person because it's just isolated. It will be fun, and the director on Left 4 Dead just do that. You have lots of interesting talk about this concept. And actually, we had something similar on Dead Cells. I can't talk about that because I'm not under NDA anymore. But we have some kind of director in the game which actually cheats a lot about the randomness of the game. So the actual random content that you get, it's actually really under control of this system. So if you, for example, we know that we'll drop you a legendary weapon at a very specific rate in the game. And if you don't see it, if you don't pick it up for some reason, we'll give you it again in the next run, just to give you this feeling of luck. And but this part was designed aside from the game. It was really a separate prototype because it necessitated lots of testing and iteration. But it was not related to the actual gameplay. It was more like global concept, how to distribute the loot and to produce content, and what should you have. For example, a good example of that is the gold system in Dead Cells. If you don't pick all the gold in a level, actually what you didn't pick will go to a special hidden value location in memory, and will just give you extra money in next level based on what you didn't pick before, just to make sure that the game feels balanced and it feels also like you're lucky because you have lots of gold or a very beautiful jewel by killing an enemy, but it's basically what you didn't get before. So just giving it.
Would you
That's
say
an
that
awesome system. I had a conversation with the lead programmer behind Dead Cells, and he mentioned that a lot of what he did was also just, it's not like game design cheating, in a sense that like you're telling the player that something will definitely happen, or use the example he gave. he talked about the chests in Dead Cells, that if you leave an area with like a bunch of coins just scattered, the game will remember that, and when you break chests, it'll give you more coins. Like it makes the game, I'm not sure if the answer is fairer, but more satisfying for the player without the player noticing.
Yes.
How much of that do you think makes game, like do you think that, I've had a conversation with a friend yesterday after the Dead Cells thing about this specifically, and I wanted to ask you, do you think that stuff like that is the magic sauce behind making good games great, because it works on the perception of the player rather than on the game itself?
I think that it is a tool that people can use and is completely valid to use. It's a tool that we don't use very often, or we use it incredibly sparingly. And I think it comes from, again, my board game drive and the amount of board games I play and how much I like board game design. Board games are not doing that. Like when you shuffle the deck you get is the deck you get, and it's not going to compensate. And when it does compensate, it's clear to the player. It's stuff like there might be a mechanic in a game that if you miss a lot, then you shuffle in a beneficial card into a deck to help make up for it, and you see those odds changing. And I've always liked transparent design like that, and I like that if the player is being benefited, the player knows it. Like we're not pretending otherwise. The game is upfront and honest with you, is a design philosophy that I generally run with when I can. Into the Breach and FTL do not fudge number rolls behind the scenes. That 10% chance to survive is genuinely 10%. It's not secretly 50% when it's going to be a game over moment. I know that some game developers do that. On a game over moment, or on a health bar is very low, really that last 1% of your health bar represents 10% of your health bar. That kind of, and I can appreciate it. It makes sense. It does create that player experience. And I've got nothing against other developers doing that. But for me, I prefer the honesty of the system, and that the player is up against a static system, and that the challenge is just the game is presenting this preset challenge, and you are playing against it, and there's no wiggle room between. And when you beat it, you've beaten the system that is structured in a static way. It's pointless philosophy in terms of what makes that a better game or not. And it's not like I don't stand by it as the only way to make games. It's probably, again, a silly way to do it, but it's always been the way that we chased it down. There are exceptions to that. You obviously can't just purely randomize things and never alter a game based on player behavior. But the strongest example, the biggest element that we did for that was in Into the Breach. The enemy spawning is highly dependent on the current state of things. How many enemies are not on the map hugely influences how many spawn, and the types of enemies that are present influences the types of enemies that spawn. And the game has to be structured to keep a certain amount of enemies of a certain type on the board at all times in order for the challenge to work. Too many enemies in one direction, the game becomes impossible, and that's not fun. Too few enemies, and the game becomes trivial, and that's not fun. And so the spawn rate is very tightly controlled. But other than that, I would be hard pressed to think of other examples of the games that we've made hiddenly modifying results based on player status.
Okay, cool.
And maybe we should have. Like a complaint that I see a lot on FTL, for example, is that the game could be highly dependent on on finding a store to find repairs or to find new weapons. And maybe we should have had a mechanic where when you're super low on health, I bump up the odds of throwing in hidden store for people to find, and to negate that complaint. But it's just not how we make games.
Development process.
What's your game building process?
It is very much, programmer art nonsense for the early prototypes. They're both blocky messes. For FTL, it was probably the first 6 months of development before we really knew what we were doing with it. Like the very, very earliest prototype was just a ship on the screen with little circles for crew members that could run around and like put out fires, and it was just an infinite asteroid field that would continually damage your ship, and you would have to repair it, put out fires. It's kind of in the end would have felt a little bit like a Overcooked or like some sort of just a plate spinning game without much more to it. No combat even. And then when we added combat, we tried to do like huge fleets where you could zoom out and control the ship and zoom back in. And I don't know how aware of FTL you are, but the final product is just a static ship still on the screen. You're not actually controlling movement at all. And we spent a bunch of time on that and tossed it out and went back to just a static screen, figured out this kind of weird combination of being able to do the enemies but keep things pretty abstract without any actual movement. And that's a good reflection on how we do it. Like when we sit down to make the game, we're not really 100% sure what the game is yet. Like it's more, we've got a rough concept of something we think would be fun. For FTL, we were inspired a lot by some board games that did crew management and things like that on spaceships, which video games mostly hadn't done. And so we were wondering what it would be like to make a video game that focused on the crew instead of the piloting. And it kind of, after iteration and screwing around with it, we stumbled upon what the final game became.
Did you work with the composer?
Yeah, and I'm a believer that sound and music are probably at least not, I don't know, maybe half what makes a game really good. Like we don't really realize it, but because it's in the background and it's kind of subconscious, it really does make a difference. And for music in this case, we just wanted to give that authentic feel. And I think the authentic feel, it's not just because of the black and white and all that, but the music is a big part of it.
How much patience do you think people need as game developers?
I think that is an excellent question. I think a lot. But I do know other developers that are less patient, and even Jay is less patient than I am when it comes to that process of pounding at it until it comes out. I'm still I think it's more stubborn than patience when it comes to just pounding at it until it comes together. But yeah, I suppose not everybody would have the mental space to be able to do that. It's not necessarily the most fun way to make something, but it can be frustrating. It is true. And I think for a lot of people, the attachment to work already done is very difficult. And it's very difficult to say, I am comfortable abandoning these 4 months of work or these 6 months of work because I think that it can be better. Like that is a sort of an emotional hurdle, I think, for a lot of developers that wouldn't be something they could fall into easily as a development strategy.
When should you make the decision to throw away stuff you've already made if you think this isn't exactly working, but maybe if I keep at it, it'll work someday? Like when should you?
That's the challenge, yeah, and that's why some things take forever, is that you don't know when to dump it. And I can't even say I was right in when we dump stuff. Like maybe there was a version of Into the Breach with that city management that would have, if we'd spent another 4 months, would have come together and would have turned into something amazing. But it's impossible to know that you did the right thing or that when the right time to do that is. I would say sooner rather than later, because you're only going to grow more attached to something. But while I say that, none of this has been us abandoning a game. Like Into the Breach involved abandoning a lot of elements and mechanics around the game, but there was a core idea to the game that we believed in that we didn't abandon. And it's hard to distinguish those two things. Like maybe it would have made more sense to just make 6 prototypes, completely different games, rather than 1 prototype and then stubbornly force that to become something. Like it's a combination of not giving up on one idea while being willing to give up on every idea that comes along with it until you make that one idea work.
Can I ask about your process to trying to find if something works and like why it doesn't work or why it does work? Like if something doesn't work, what do you do?
We play test a lot on ourselves. Like the vast majority of our decision making is just that we play the game. If we are enjoying the game, then we're more likely to keep it. There is an element of we are impatient in the way that you're talking about before, in that we need it to be fun quite quickly. And we have found that we are faster and better developers when we have a small idea that we can build up from a small fun base and kind of keep putting pieces on that just make it more fun, rather than needing to, like, if you're making Civilization or you're making that metagame for Into the Breach or whatever, like that, you can't make Civilization fun in a week. You need to spend 9 months, a year or whatever, building up that really big complicated machine, and then press go and hope that it works. While it's easier to build up something like Splunky from a small piece, like just the movement in Splunky is fun. You make a quick little platformer, and then you add an enemy, and then you add a new type of trap, and then you add a new, and you can just kind of, you take that core kernel that's immediately fun, and you can stack on top of it.
If they saw themselves, considering they were like a group of friends working together, if they saw themselves as a company, or
Right.
as like creative individuals breaking grounds, making games, fuck the system, how do you see yourself?
I would say we don't see ourselves as a company. We do see ourselves as, I mean, I was gonna say as a studio, but to us it's different. Like we're not, obviously we're not a big company. We have no intention of becoming a big company. We just want to be a small, a small team making games, and that's really like our goal is just to make the games that we want to make and make lots of them. So that's the way we see ourselves, like game makers, basically. Just people who make games and are trying to sell them. And yeah, we'd like to say fuck the system, and we occasionally do, but yeah, I don't know. It's just we don't want to do things the same way everyone else does. We're kind of forced to in some ways, because obviously we do need the project to work at least somehow.
3. Marketing.
You had a very strong motive when you started making Dead Cells, like based on what you said. You wanted to make a roguelike with good combat. How important do you think having a strong desire when coming into a project or coming into like starting to develop a game is? Or what do you think you need before coming into development of any type of game?
That's a good question. It's really difficult because it's basically asking yourself, should I involve my next few months and years making this, and is it a viable project in any way? Is it something that I should do because I'm going to spend quite a lot of time doing that? Is it a good idea? For me, it's really like from time to time, you will be playing games and you will say, hey, it would be cool to have this kind of game. And you're looking for it, you're browsing games and you're looking for something that feels like that. And somehow you don't find any. Like, for example, for Dead Cells, it was really I wanted to have an action, like a Castlevania game, but with rogue elements. It was really just that. And we were like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's see what people did on that. And actually, we didn't find like anything except Spelunky and Rogue Legacy. We did find a few ones, but really not that much. If sometime you identify like a gap, like a loophole in something, you would say, hey, it would be cool, but hey, that doesn't exist actually. For me, it's my main motivation to make a project. Usually, I have a broad idea for things I would like to do, but if it fits like a all, and this all is actually like a viable place to be, it's just enough for me to start. We were really lucky on Dead Cells to have this funny world that we kept and we market like to the max, which was Roguevania. It's something that we came up with just in the middle of a discussion. We did have this keyword of making a Roguevania. And it was like a really, really powerful word to explain. I think sometimes you have a very small concept that can be explained, and it actually explains everything. It's a whole game. So for that test, we are really lucky to have this thrown randomly in the middle of a discussion. So it was really the strong start point of this. And actually, we kept that till the end. It was the marketing, the main marketing motto for the game.
Saying that,
the answer to the question.
So you're saying that one very powerful motivator, both for the team and for like the game, is to have this very strong concept. Even like Roguevania is just a word, but it clearly shows what you. it clearly shows where it fits in the market and shows what the game is in a sense. So you're saying that's important. Yeah.
I think in game design terms, it's really similar to the pillars of a game. You know, when you are making game design whatsoever, you actually have 2 or 3 pillars, columns, strong words that will help to define the game, and they're like really difficult to find, these pillars, these words, because if you say exploration is like doesn't mean anything. It means everything and anything. So it's really similar to that, to have a super short explanation of the game that can actually sell a dream behind that. So yeah, and that was really the starting point of the game when we decided to switch to give up on multiplayer on mobile, and actually slowly turn into what it is now.
How that's an thing that interests me when you have a hit like this. Not saying that it's like the largest hit, of course not. There could be much more and much less. But how much does it finance you today? Like 5 years later, does it still bring some revenue, or is it really too minor to even count on?
So it does. Obviously not to the same level, and it's thanks to my publisher, because they keep pulling like bundles, they keep doing sales, and they keep finding ways to keep it relevant. So the physical edition came out like 2 years later or a year later. We have sold plushies, we have released additional languages. So like I think last year we did Korean, for example, and German. So when you do that, it's like a new wave of people that get to. So I think we even sold like coffee mugs and cell phone covers. So you find ways. Oh yeah, the tragedy is that my phone is not compatible with the cell phone case. I'm destroyed. I wanted a cell phone cover. I need to buy a new phone just so I can put the cover on it.
If you wouldn't have, or the publisher put in the extra effort, it would be like not as much at all.
Yeah, I fully believe that you need to make like an effort. So every April Fools, we post something. We retweet a lot of fan art. We're just there. The community is nice. I think if you just leave it there, it'll die off. You have to do something to keep it alive. It's very hard for a game to just keep selling for no reason. It doesn't happen. So I think like after the game comes out, it's like another game dev cycle, like another battle. You just have to keep going. So we did a lot of patches. We took a lot of feedback after it came out on Switch, and we did like this super giant free patch that added like 4 side quests, like a super boss, like fix a lot of shit. It also keeps it relevant because people are like, oh, I'll check it out, or oh, I'll retweet the trailer, and that helps as well.
The free patches you're saying are like, from your experience, putting in like a big free patch, an update is a good way to keep the game, like to garner more sales. Like I'd say Dead Cells or Hollow Knight, I feel like are the examples of doing it that way.
Yeah, like if your team can afford it, if it's something that doesn't set you back on like your next project. So for Bug Fables, the patch that added new stuff, it mostly used old characters, so we had to do very little assets. In fact, the most expensive stuff in the patch was translating it to all the languages.
I was really wondering if translating like boosted sales more than you expected, because like tell me translate the game to like French, and like how many people who just know French like would play the game because it has French in it?
So I don't have a French version, so I can't answer for France. But for example, the Japanese version is a big fraction. The Japanese community. I think it depends on your game, because it's like a cute indie RPG, maybe it works in Japan. We always pair the new translations with other stuff. I don't know exactly how much new translation helps, and also there's the situation where people from the country that has the translation has bought the game and played it in English as well. So that also factors in. So I can't give you an exact number, but I do think it's worth it. You know, I think it's worth it. If it's not like, if your game is not like Bug Fables level of dialogue, it has like 150,000 words of dialogue. I was not slacking. Oh my god, I don't want to write a game with that much dialogue.
Bug Fables 2, environmental storytelling.
My students are like, Professor, is this the year you announced Bug Fables 2? I'm like, no, leave me alone.
No, we don't mind. Like, do what's best for you.
You know that meme from Akira? Like, Akira! And then I see Bug Fables 2, I'm like, leave me alone.
How important do you think it is to build a community before release? Like, before a game releases?
It's pretty important. Yeah, it's pretty damn important. Like, Discord is a great tool to do that. It's great especially because you can interact with the players and they're really receptive to that. But yeah, it's really important because, well, if no one knows about your game before you release it, you'll release it, and no one will buy it, no one will play it. And the thing is, that momentum that you need before your release, it's really important. It's hard to overstate how important it is that when your game comes out, it has at least some interest already, because otherwise it's just much harder to get that interest afterwards, right? After the game is out. And because as soon as the game is out, like a week later, the game is old news, right? And it's just that much harder to get new eyes on it.
Do you have any tips for students who, like, let's say they'll get to a point where they're interacting with a community? Like, how do you interact with a community?
How do you interact with the community? Oh, that's a tough one. That's a whole subset of development. We generally listen, but don't. We acknowledge, but we don't say we're going to do anything. So we're very non-committal, and it's because even if you are 100% sure that you should commit to somebody's like suggestion or idea or bug fix, once you actually get to fixing it, it might not be true. We think about language, as we said, even for cards all the time, but also for our announcements. I wrote every single announcement, and we just kind of reveal new things and don't really say like, oh, we're going to do XYZ. It's like we're working on XYZ is kind of the language that we use often. Interacting with the community though, my goodness. I mean, it's not good to be like completely vacant. You don't want to be like never responding to anything and you're just like this enigmatic machine that churns something out sometimes. But in general, we're quite vocal. We talk a lot about stuff. We have a Discord. Interacting with the community, it differs per community. So that's something important to note. We interact very differently based on if it's the Steam forums and announcements, the comment section of every single announcement. We have like a subreddit. We interact very differently in the subreddit. We have a Discord. We interact in a different way in our Discord. So
how what changes between those platforms?
What changes? I see. Let's see here. What changes? Since some of them are not made for discussions, you can't really have a back and forth, and that just naturally changes how you talk with people. So for Reddit and Steam, we generally are very like apologetic and neutral, like customer service, because there are much more international customers or just people who are just kind of crazy, to be honest. Steam is like insane. I don't know what it is about Steam, but the discussions are like very like entitled and unsympathetic and like just cruel. And so you just kind of want to talk in a very like professional, like not personal tone.
Cruel is like I want to explore cruel.
Or cruel?
Yeah. What's cruel?
Like, oh, what are these devs doing out there? What is this shit update? Or they just be like shit update and just like post like a meme and just like get out of there, right? It's just like they're just like heartless human beings. They're just children, and you just have to know that like it's like, oh, okay, this is where the psychopaths live. Like this is where they are. You know, they're not here to interact with anybody. They think they're enacting change by being cruel to developers.
Like, what do you think about this game?
It succeeded for three reasons. First of all, people wanted something like it and it wasn't available. Reason two, we really liked the game we were making enough to sacrifice for it. And reason three, we listened to every complaint without getting offended about it. I think it's something that people don't do sometimes. I've met a lot of stubborn people. So we would, every convention, notebook, observe, every demo, listen, every close playtest, they would give us lists of wrong things, like 50 items, and we were like, how many can we fix? 40? Okay, then we fix it. Just be humble, because like there's no way two people can understand as much as like 5,000. It's not that number, but you get it. The beta testing was super important. I think we also showed that we're a team that listens instead of just like telling you to like fuck off. We actually fix stuff. That helps a lot too. You have to do a lot of market study. If you release a game that's like other 20 games coming out and you have to be more special than 20 games, it's really hard. If it's the game you want to make, it's fine. But you have to set expectations of who you're fighting when you're fighting. Release date also matters. Yeah, like if you release your game next to Breath of the Wild or something, like good luck, man. why would you release your game next to Breath of the Wild? Like, you know what's coming out on that day. You're fighting Zelda for no reason. Like, find a week that's chill, so that you're the only thing people talk about for a bit. That's also important.
How can you know if people want something and it's missing, like in the current market?
That's a good question. Because for bug fails, it's because we wanted it and it wasn't there. But I imagine people feel like that with the things they like. They just have this longing and they're like, I really wish this game was real, and there's nothing there that satisfies me. And then you look and it's not there, and you find people asking, like, when is the new, let's say Advance Wars, when is the new Advance Wars coming out? It's been 20 years or something. And then someone makes Wargroove, and then Wargroove sells. There's also option 2, just do what you want and be happy. But that one's super risky, so have a backup plan for that one. But I like it. If you can combine both, it's super good. Like, do what you love and people want it. Nice. It's really hard to find that.
3.5 Marketing, what makes a game marketable?
What do you think makes a game marketable, and should people even care about that?
Okay, so I will start with the second question. Should you think about that? That's really up to you. Like, I know that some developers do think about that. Like, maybe not necessarily first and foremost, but they think about it a lot, and they're not gonna get into making a game if it doesn't have any marketing potential whatsoever. But it's really up to you. Are you making a game because you believe in your idea, or are you making a game because you want it to sell and you want to have millions of players? But also, it's important to remember that if you think, like, if you have a game idea because, like, let's say, for example, you see that Vampire Survivor is making lots of sales and everyone is talking about it. If you think it's a good idea to make a Vampire Survivor-like, at that point, you have to realize that you're not the only one having that idea. You're not the only one noticing what's happening. And so in a month or two, there are going to be an onslaught of Vampire Survivor likes. And do you want to be part of that? Right. So I think all that is important to keep in mind. Now, what makes a game marketable is also hard to define. I do think it's important to, like, I think it's good if your game fits a niche. So for us, Shotgun King did that with the chess niche, but, like, I don't know what all the niches are, actually. I don't know, but just, like, you want a game idea that is going to cater to a specific type of people that you actually have a way to reach out to, and that's going to be your best bet.
For making a game more marketable, I'm trying to think. It depends on, like, I think everything depends on your final, like, who is buying your game, right? Because what makes a game marketable for audience B or A is not the same thing. Like, for example, for Celeste, we have an audience that we need to feed, let's say like that. And it's not the same audience as like of Wars, because this audience, they wish different experiences.
What do you think makes it marketable?
Yeah, I feel like SlaytheSpire is an interesting example because the art is not as flashy as you would like expect of a game today. It doesn't necessarily pass off in a GIF. There's some like general marketing strategies that have been put out on the internet, and it still worked very well. So
let's see, a game that is marketable. So if we start from the word market, there's like classic marketing, which is like if you do something called a SWOT analysis, that's like classic marketing. So that's like the very basic minimum that you should do, which is like, this genre is like oversaturated or not. This genre is growing, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of like breaking out and making like a hit game, I would say you need two big things. And that is, you need aesthetic distinction. So it has to be visually distinct from everything that exists. So, and it has to have its own identity. So that's pretty important. Like, it can look good, but if it looks similar to other good looking things, you're going to be compared to those other things. Like, you have to be the best in how it looks. And SlaytheSpire doesn't really look like anything. So it's not compared to anything. So we try to bypass that. I think this is pretty similar to what's called the blue ocean strategy. And that's when you try to make something that is very distinct from what exists. Like Nintendo has this strategy because they make consoles that are not as powerful as Xbox or PlayStation, right? But they have something that makes them distinct. You don't really compare the Nintendo Switch to anything else because nothing else like it existed before. So
yeah, but Nintendo also does this with their unique art style and stuff like that. They have a very personal identity of anything.
Exactly. So like Mario's, it runs on like I don't know if you know how strong the Switch is. It is like really, really shitty. It's like very slow. And it looks so good still because of their aesthetic identity. It's so important. So that's important. So visuals. And then the other one is the gameplay. Just gameplay. You need some novelty, but for me, I would say if you want to market it, unfortunately, this is kind of a hot take, but you just need to have a game that has a good return on investment for the customer. So, it's like a $10 game, but you can get like 30 hours of like stuff out of it. And it's
why is this a hot take? It makes
it's nobody wants to hear it, okay? Like on Twitter, you say you're like, oh, your game has to be 30 hours. Then somebody who's making an artsy game will be like, not every game. I'm not trying to say every game has to be that. But if you want to make a living, if you want to make a living and you want to like actually have people buy your game and then tell other people that it's like good things to buy and play, then you should really consider like making a game that has long-term replay value, or it's just long game. So it's possible to make a game that is short and is very good, of course. Like we all know that. There's all sorts of games that are short and fantastic, but the value proposition is much harder for people.
I wanted to ask you if there's anything else, or A, if you agree with that, and B, if you think there's anything else that makes a game marketable, or that it is important for any game to have to be successful in the market.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. If you're making like a very visually unique game, but it's like an action game, but maybe you have puzzle games that look like that, but are puzzle games. We don't care about that. It's really being different in your own segment of market. So if you're making an action game, be different from other action games. But different is difficult because what is different and what is actually appealing to people. For me, that's I got from Steve, I was talking about earlier. It's really, if you Google action games, for example, if you can quickly identify a game, even if it's small thumbnail, you're doing a good job, I think, whatever your visual style is. If your game is identifiable, it can be recognized among many others. That means you probably have done something right. For example, I do love Outer Wilds. But this game, if you try to look for 3D games, actually Outer Wilds looks a lot like many other games. It's not unique visually, it's unique design-wise, it's unique in the universe. But if you're looking for top-down action games, you will probably instantly recognize Hades, you will recognize, before that, there was Bastion, Dead Cells, of course, in platformers. But some games are visually recognizable. And I think that's really the most important thing, is make sure that if you Google action games, you don't look like everything that you see on your screen. And just try to keep that in mind.
4. Early access.
Usually, early access is good for games that are either you can replay them a lot, like Hades or SlaytheSpire, or multiplayer games, like I think Phasmophobia was in early access for a while. Mm-hmm. Games with a lot of replay value.
Yes.
Would you have released, I don't know what your next project is, but if it's not like something with high replay value, would you have released it into early access?
I don't think we would have, to be honest. That's my take. I think Kleenex testing, like first-time playtesters, is extremely important for games that are like linear, as we'll say, like story from start to finish. That's like a very different type of game. And a lot of my advice will not work for those kinds of games. So I'm not sure. I actually brought up the same question when I was at GDC for a game called Subnautica, and because they were in early access, and it's an open world survival crafting game. I think open world survival crafting games, that is a long genre name, by the way. They're more open-ended, and there's a lot of gameplay to do. So it's not as linear as the developers probably thought. But I think in general, games that are extremely linear, if we think of like kind of like cookie cutter AAA games, I don't want to say cookie cutter because that means they're not creative, which is false. Games like Control are very creative, you know, in terms of like storytelling, what you can do.
Remedy is
But-
insanely creative. Like,
Yeah. So
It's one of the
I mean
most
those,
common-
but like not many people are going to replay them over and over again, and that's something that you have to really think about. And I would probably just try to get a new playtester in pretty frequently to test, and you have to just kind of watch somebody play from start to finish. Or if you release a new thing, you're like, oh, the new thing is added. Can we watch somebody play the new chapter or whatever? You have to think of a different type of framework for testing for sure. It's just a very different thing. Roguelikes just have a humongous advantage in terms of like QA, but also means, you know, there's also the matrix of complexity, so things can break as well. So, you know, pros and cons.
Do you recommend people go early access as opposed to just marketing before release?
No, not necessarily. What I hear about early access these days is that you have this impression of having like two releases, right? Because you have this first early access release, and then you have the full release, like maybe a few years later. And the thing is, especially as far as press is concerned, and like streamers and people like that, there's only one release. And it's either going to be the early access release, and usually that's the one that matters to them, or if the early access release is like understated, kind of, press will just cover the full release. But they will very rarely cover both releases, right? And the problem is that when you go into early access, you're doing it because your game is not complete. And so the first version for the early access is not the one that you want people, like, that you want the most people to see, right? But then you're also going on early access because you want to sell the game and you want to make some money from it. So you do need some people to see it, but it's really, really difficult to like just get some and not all the people, right? Like not all the potential people that you could have for the final full release. So I feel like early access is just difficult to navigate right now. You can do it, but if you're gonna do it, you better have something that's already very solid when you get into early access.
5. Publishers and publishing.
I'm actually really interested, like, what you pitched.
I might have a link of the video actually. Yeah, it's just simply like it took me like 2-3 weeks. I learned Unreal, which is super easy to learn. And now that you have GPT-4, you got no excuse if you don't know how to use that. You just need to like sit down and learn because it's very simple. I mean, it's infinitely complex too, but like it really holds your hand. It's not like pure coding or going into like crazy stuff. You can do a lot with like zero knowledge today. So I learned Unreal, the basics, in a couple of weeks and tried to make an experiment with a friend who was like, he kind of knew a little bit how to do combat stuff. So he was more an expert in the blueprints, then eventually learned that too. But I made this like 10-minute video or something of just a character going through some scenes with some background music, black and white, showing a few mechanics, showing what the character would go through, different camera angles, the idea of how the design should have been. Very broken, very basic, but that's all you needed. All I needed to show was like how the game was supposed to work. So I sent him that YouTube video. I had like a 30-page design document because, you know, the ideas would just keep coming and I couldn't stop them. So I tried to, like, that was actually a bad thing. Usually you don't want a document that's that long. You want something much shorter because you're going to have to redesign everything anyway, and publishers don't like to read anyway. So that's kind of how it started. Like 6 to 8 months later, actually, we started production. It's been,
Really?
you know, yeah, because you got to go through contracts and then you have to say, okay, maybe this is going to happen, maybe not. So you still need a lot of months to go through their contracts, go back and forth. Then maybe the team is not okay with some other parts of the contract, etc. I mean, that part takes long. All right, so I think the most challenging part to me was that the contract was written in a way that was a bit, they knew what they were doing, basically. We came up with like all of the solutions of the game design idea in pre-production, because in pre-production I had control, I had creative control over the game design decisions. Only in pre-production though, which means that once we figure out something that we were all okay with, they scrapped the idea and they made their own, because they had no power after pre-production. So that was kind of frustrating and kind of messed up in a way, right?
Can I ask you about your pitch to your publisher? What was that like? What did you show them?
Honestly, I cannot answer that question because it was like 5 years ago. I don't remember. I think I just sent them like, I literally copy pasted the Indiegogo like description and put the trailer, and I was like, yeah, reach out to us, man. I don't remember. I don't think I can even find the email. I have so much correspondence with my publisher, I would never find it. But pitching an Indiegogo is very similar to pitching to your publisher. You have to be very concise. You have to home in on the things that make you stand out. And you have to be very brief because people get bored really fast. Like, don't talk about yourself. Don't talk about the lore too much. Just what's your game about, right? Just put that out there. And then put the rest afterwards. You have to hook them with the first line. Like a game intro. Your intro's boring, they just refund the game.
Actually I talked with the creative director of Trek to Yomi and the guy behind one of the leads behind BoomerangX, and they described very different experiences with the same publisher. They both described the experience as very hands-off. So one of them wanted a very hands-on experience, and the other one wanted a very hands-off experience. Do you think people should consider the size of a publisher when they're approaching them, or when they're ready to start approaching publishers?
Yeah, I definitely do think they should. I would say typically, and this isn't always true, but typically the larger the publisher, the more hands-off they become. When they become larger, they're typically signing more games. They're typically becoming more of a financier. And at that point, they're sort of just, and this isn't always the case, but placing a lot of bets on different titles. For a publisher our size, when we sign a game, the investment is big for us. It's a significant. It's not where we can just make investments and not worry about how it goes. We want to make sure the investment is going well, and we want to make sure that the games that we sign do as well as they can do. And so because of that, I think that we're typically a bit more hands-on, because we provide a lot of feedback. We even assist sometimes with co-development. We're often doing the porting for the titles that we're working on. We're very heavily involved to try to help produce the best product possible. And I think one thing that people hear sometimes when they hear hands-on is they think micromanaging or will take the creative vision. And I don't think that's maybe with some people, but that's not always the case. I think it also can just mean that the amount of time and focus and effort towards each project increases. And when we are even doing co-development, we still very much want the vision to sit with the developer and the creative people that created it, but we do want to help polish it, and we do want to help make it the best version of their vision that we can. And so our feedback typically is ways that that game can become the best version of itself.
Do you think people are bad with contracts?
And developers, you mean?
Yeah, well, developers.
I would say typically yes, just because of a lack of experience doing it. It's like, as a game publisher, I've been through kind of the publishing contract phase, probably 30 or 40 times at this point. But as an average developer, maybe you only get exposed to that, once per game. If that, not by anyone's fault. I think it's just lack of experience makes people typically bad at it. And so I do always recommend getting legal assistance with contracts, because to me that's the best signing with us, that's, an 8-year commitment. And you want to make sure that you're protected. You want to make sure that if things, if the publisher stops paying you, if the publisher, you want to plan for the worst case scenario. And that's what a lawyer will help you with.
When you're talking with the developer, whether it's through email or through conventions, like, what's the best way to approach you, by the way? I'm already asking. Or is there an ideal way?
I think my ideal way is just an email. It keeps everything, it allows me or our team to include the proper people on the email chain that need to be included. If it's a message on social media or LinkedIn, I'll typically just say, can you email me these materials, and here's the email to do it.
So just for students basically to know what's important to bring to a pitch.
Yeah, so we receive a lot of pitches a month, and you almost need to think of it as a job application where there are many other applicants, and so if you're missing any key information, you're almost automatically thrown out. If you're it at least will take extra steps for the publisher to have to ask for that stuff from you, which means that they need to be interested in the game that you're pitching. And so I'd say kind of the core stuff that every prospective person who's pitching their game to a publisher should have would be, the first thing that we look for is just a video of what your game is about. And usually that doesn't need to be super well edited, doesn't need to be a trailer, but at least some gameplay footage that showcases what your game is about. Then if the game looks interesting, we typically will start looking through the details in a pitch deck. It's best when you've summarized these details in the intro email, and the intro email is, kept short and succinct with links to each of these things. But, we want to know stuff like, what's your development budget? Which platforms are you developing the game for? Which engine is your game in? What's your anticipated timeline? Those are all important information, to have both in your intro email and then expand on it a little bit more in your pitch deck. For instance, if you say your budget is $100,000 in your intro email, then in your pitch deck, have a slide that shows the breakdown of that budget. I also think the pitch deck's a great place where people can elaborate a bit on, what you can't see in the current state of the game. So like, this is like what future levels can look like. This is what future content can look like. This is the roadmap that we have, for the title down the road. And then, of course, having a build is very important. But usually that's actually the final thing we look at if everything else is in alignment.
6. Leadership and hierarchy.
I'd love to ask you how much of your time was prioritizing and scheduling, and how much was spent on dealing with people's emotions. Did that come into play at all?
Dealing with people emotions?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, because I just talk about ego and stuff, obviously there's no place, at least for me, there shouldn't be place for that. Truth is, there's always ego and stuff involved, right? But for emotions, it's normal to have emotions. It's normal for the emotions to just come up at work, because some people can handle the stress pretty well, some other can't. Some people can be frustrated as well. I've been frustrated so many times during the project, not because it was not going well, but probably because I was going through, it was my, again, first experience. So I was going through specific production moments that were like kind of new to me. And because of my background, which was advertising, project manager or account director, if something comes up, it's me. I need to fix it. I need to do it. I need to shake things up. I need to kill someone. I need to blow up a building. What needs to be done, and it needs to be fixed, and it needs to be now, literally. So emotions are fine. It's not an easy ride, never. And some people, again, can deal pretty well with stress. Some people can't really do it. But I think because we're all, again, super intertwined, we always support each other. It's you have some really great times, you have some tough times sometimes, and it all depends how you can handle it. I mean, I've seen some people like sometimes not throwing a tantrum, but maybe overreacting, not in a great way towards some people from my team. It's completely fine, but do you need to talk not in a nice way to those people? No, let's just close the Zoom call. Like, oh, I think we've been disconnected. No, I removed you from the meeting because you were just way over the line. So take 5 minutes, one day, 2 days, whatever. When you come back, start with an apology and then we'll talk. Or one of my cinematics did one day, was like, hey, can we have a meeting? Oh yeah, sure, let's have a meeting. What's wrong? And she was literally bursting into tears because she was so overwhelmed by the amount of work to be done and the amount of time that was dedicated to this specific part. And I was like, okay, I understand. Let's not cry. What do you need? You need more people? Okay, let's bring more people in and no questions asked. And it's been sorted out in 3 days, like literally. So we brought outsourcers because we don't want people being emotional, yes, but
people breaking down,
no. And again, if you're not feeling well, if you're feeling a bit emotional, if you're feeling a bit stressed, again, communication. Let's talk about it and see what we can do and how we can help, how we can accommodate. You're having too much work? Okay, let's try to find something. There's something that is frustrating you because you don't understand it or because you're not managing doing it. Okay, let's talk about it. There's probably someone a bit more senior that can probably help. We can probably just shuffle things, I guess, just to avoid, burnout, being emotional, being just constantly stressed.
I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Anthony. Like, do you have hierarchy? Like, who makes the decisions? What happens if you don't, like, if you disagree?
I see. We disagree all the time, as you might expect. We don't have a hierarchy, which is why a game takes a long time to make, to be honest. But it also means that nobody is ever unhappy with the final result. Even if one is considered worse or better, or you disagree ultimately, I think we just know that we're fair to each other. And sometimes we would just be like A or B, and then we would like state our case, and we just have to pick one at the end of the day. But we're both very pragmatic, so we know that it has to be done, and that's pretty important. And ultimately, you just have to always act in good faith, and always believe the other person is acting in good faith. You just need a level of trust, and if you don't have trust, then you're going to say yes but not mean yes, and then you're just gonna have ill feelings over time, and you don't want to ever build that up.
I feel like it's kind of like one of the dreams of many developers. I feel like having a 50-man team that like needs to do what you tell them, but I'm sure that in practice it's a bit more convoluted than that.
I guess it really depends on what's your goal. Like I think if you like leadership and then you should just be a producer and do that. But when your idea is to create something specific, you don't care if you have 50 people, if you have 2, you just need to get there, right? So if you're alone, you're gonna get there alone. If you have 100 people, you're gonna have to drag them with you. I mean, it's just when you know that something's going on its own and you don't fully know it's that direction. From my experience, every time that happens tends to go in the wrong direction.
When there's not a clear vision.
Yeah, it's because, someone listens to their boss and they're doing what they're told, and then you realize they're doing something that has nothing to do with their objective. So one important thing is you really need to be sure that everyone is on the same page and everyone understands what they're doing, and they're not just doing whatever they're told to do, because otherwise you get like, the telephone game days.
7. Producing games with Pierre Bouvy.
What would you say is the most valuable, I guess, value that a producer needs to have?
I don't know. The most valuable thing a producer can bring, probably gathering people, but gathering in a way that it's not. Obviously, there's the idea of bringing people around the same table. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of things at the same time, mostly, and you need to make sure that things are flowing, and sometimes you literally need to think for other people. Just like, oh, let's not forget about that. Let's keep that on our radar. Okay, let's do that, but let's not forget about that because they're intertwined, or there can be some knock-on effect for that. So I think probably being an octopus is probably the most valuable thing
Being
a
a
producer
what?
can bring. An octopus.
Oh, an
Yes,
octopus.
like
Okay.
being all over. Yeah, that sounds like you have to manage a lot of information all the time.
Yes, you have to manage a lot of informations really, and you also need to get the information. You also need to give the information. Sometimes you will also get contrary information, so you need to do like, okay, which information is the right one? Who is right? Who is? It's not about being right or being wrong, but
Do you feel like you need to know everything? Like, if someone comes to you with a question, do you always need to have an answer, or like readily available to get an answer?
No, I think in games it's really tricky, and because it's so complex, and you're supposed to make things easier for everybody, but because you're a producer and you're covering so many different things at the same time, there's no way you have the right answer. If someone asks you a question, okay, maybe you have the answer, but maybe you don't, but someone else will have it. So it's just about having the right people doing the right thing, if that makes sense. So if I don't have the answer, that's fine. I don't have it, because obviously if a colleague is asking me for a very specific code question, how would I know? I'm not a coder. Or very specific design question. Either I can do it, and if I can't, I will see if I can do it, if I have to do it, or if someone else can do it, or if someone else is supposed to do it. I'm just directing.
I've had an instance in my work where I had a tech guy which was very overwhelmed with the amount and different types of tasks that we had, and we had like this talk at the where we ate together, and he was going off on the producer for not prioritizing the tasks. And it felt like, I'm not sure if the producer really did prioritize the tasks as well as he could, but it felt like it was just an easy target for the misorganization that the tech guy felt in his mind. Like, I feel like maybe the producer is an easy target sometimes. Have you felt that?
Probably, yes. I don't know. I think a producer can be just like the account manager. You're the buffer between whatever happens in the agency and the client. And if let's say the art director is going to come up with a print, when I say print, it's just like A4 paper with some cool design on it, and the client doesn't like it, the client is not going to talk to the art director. He's going to talk to you, the account manager, and the client will yell at you, and eventually you as a project manager, you will say to the art director, the client didn't like it. When the client like, it's shit, I hate you. If you don't do it as I want, I'm going to hold any payments and I'm going to see another agency. But you can't say that. So as a producer, yes, you're the buffer as well. It kind of depends. I guess the producer has to adapt as well on the way some people and some teams can work. So for example, the audio was really well organized as people already, as a department, right? But not because I did anything, but because the people who were working in audio were already kind of organized themselves in their lives. The cinematics, they were just kind of, I'm not saying that in a bad way, this is like a real compliment, like movie nerds, right? So they're all about the scene, how do we film this, how do we make this happen, and just creative. So they're really committed to their art, really about creativity, but sometimes they would spend way too much time on something that is like, we don't need it. Oh yes, but here we see the bottle for 1 second, we should see it for 2 seconds. No, because that's 1 additional second on screen, but that's, I don't know, an extra day of work for you. That's, if we start looking at the little details like that, we're not going anywhere. Let's just do everything, and the details we'll see later, if we can, if we want, if we have time.
And did you get pushback on that sometimes? Like, did you have arguments with people saying this has to be in now, and you're saying no, this can be pushed back?
It happened. I think it happened mostly at the end of when we're just like kind of closing the game, because the cinematics were technically done with their work. So it was now about just the time for the audio team to just do everything they needed to do, because cinematics is done. We can just technically work in peace. So I suggest the cinematics to keep them busy, to just play the game from A to Z in one go, and they would take notes. And I had like more than 800 notes on, oh, this shot should be longer, there's a camera mismatch, or this and this and this, which is nuts. Like 800 notes, just like, okay, what would you suggest, guys? Oh, we can do it in 3 weeks. Okay, that's 3 weeks. No, we can't do that. Because then the audio will be 3 weeks behind. Whatever you're going to touch will have an impact on audio. So what I did is just like, okay, let's gather the notes. I'm going to have a look at those notes with audio, with the cinematics lead, and also with the creative director. And let's see what we should leave, because there's probably, let's say, 40% of those notes that we can just completely scrap. It's not going to change anything for the user, for the player. And then just triage by priority. Okay, this one is kind of an annoying one. Let's put it as very high priority, but let's look at it now if it has like a huge impact on audio, or let's look at it after, because let's leave the area safe for audio, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. From your experience, what do you want people to know?
Communication. Really, it's so easy and so tricky at the same time. Communication, really. The other thing that I've learned, really, I think that's something really personal. I'm going to say it anyways, because maybe some people relate, but this is like really my personal experience, is there's always the imposter syndrome. But working with Internet for 3 years kind of really helped me with the imposter syndrome in some ways. And it kind of turned into the Jason Bourne syndrome, which is you're getting experience, but you don't really know you're getting experience.
8. QA.
What did you, like, if I can ask, what did you learn from your job as QA that like you incorporated later into when you started making games?
I feel like a lot of I've started as QA in my job. I'm still like technically QA, and I feel it's one of the most missing aspects in a lot of games. And I feel like since you came up from, then that may have influenced the development in a way.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree. QA lets you know that nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly, you just can't design a perfect product. It's like if you build a rocket, the first rocket you build is just gonna not work. Like, it's not even gonna crash and explode. It's probably not even gonna, like, launch. In that way, QA it's taught me that, like, everybody being wrong and writing wrong code, writing bad architecture, writing buggy video games, it's just a normal part of the process. Both Anthony and I have QA backgrounds. I did the game testing and QA work at Microsoft for a pretty long time. That was my college job. And then out of college, I worked at Amazon as a quality assurance engineer. And why I worked at Amazon instead of games is because games doesn't pay. So QA jobs for games pays pretty much nothing, pretty much minimum wage. And people are looked down upon pretty severely, so people don't try very hard. It's a very different atmosphere. I think the salary range is already like triple to quadruple of what it would be in the game industry. And you get to work more closely with like the developer who's actually working on it. You write test plans, you find out where things break, and even like the programmers would like review your test plans to make sure that like when they write their bad code, because they can admit they're going to write bad code, where it's going to break. And then you just kind of learn more and more about how things break over time. And you just know about it ahead of time. And even if you know how it's going to break, you still can't prevent it from happening. That's what you really learn from QA, I guess.
You learned that like everything's built broken, basically.
Yeah. And there's also different levels of testing. There's like a pyramid of like testing that is cheap and is pretty effective. There's testing that is very expensive and finds a lot of things. There's testing that is extraordinarily expensive but helps very little. Like, there's like a ratio for every kind of testing, like unit tests, pipeline tests. There's like different names for them, but I'm not very awake, so I can't think of them right away. But manual testing is considered like kind of like expensive, and the quality differs quite a bit depending on the firm as well and how much experience the person has doing the testing, especially just like standard manual testing for like functional behavior.
What would you say is like the most, I don't know, I'm assuming each one is game by game scenario, which one helps the most and doesn't help the most. But you've done like far more QA than I anticipated. Is there one that you like saw often that was important and overlooked?
I would say the most important is probably just the most basic manual testing. It's like testing freeform, and then I think it should writing good bugs and putting your opinion about what a bug is and isn't. So like if a game crashes, that's very clearly a bug. But if you open a menu and it goes up, it goes back down, and then goes up, it's like that's a bug too. But the game isn't like it doesn't like crash, or like the color is like a little off. Like somebody's like, oh, take my purple sword, and it's like it's kind of red. Like it doesn't look very purple. Like those kind of fuzzier bugs. Just learning about the importance of those kinds of bugs is very interesting, and I think those are pretty important bugs. And once you are too good at writing bugs, you kind of have a lot of spare time, and your bugs start to get strange. It's just like this sword does too much damage. Like you start having opinions about the game.
It happened.
So,
Maybe it's because of early access, but I feel like gameplay wise, the game came out like super tight in a lot of ways. It feels like every card did get like the attention, and every event kind of got the attention it deserved. Or would you say otherwise? I don't know.
yeah, I would say we did a pretty good job. We were also in internal playtest for like I think I said previously, but we were internally playtesting for a very long time before we released. So, and that helps a lot. I think making a roguelike game helped us do that. So the previous games, I guess plural, were like arcade games or kind of like a pretty straightforward campaign game. But a roguelike, to do any kind of playtest, you have to play the whole thing. So it helps maintain quality because you get to experience the whole thing, and then you're just trying to improve the whole thing at the same time, all the time.
I really try to not explain my problem, just most of the time, just because if I do, people would just play or explain in different way, and I won't get the fresh experience that I'm looking for.
I've spoken to several people who have very different takes on QA. Some of them say that they just want someone who comes in from the start and stays for a very long time on QA, because then they probably know the game as well as you do. And they're able to identify both your design decisions and what works and what doesn't. And there are people who say, I'd rather bring in as many new people as I can, because that the initial experience is the most important thing for me.
Actually, I think both are really important because I like this. I don't remember who said that, but it was like the 5 first seconds, 5 first minutes, 15 first minutes, and 5 first hours. Something like that. I don't remember exactly, but you get the idea. It's really about making sure that at 5 seconds you have something interesting happening. At 15 you have something like a hook, and you have at 5 minutes you have something fresh which say, hey, there is potential in this game. And 5 hours you have actually depth in your game. And it's really important to have someone who have no idea what the game is about if you want to test that. And for me, it's really is a big part of making games, to have a good onboarding and a game that suggests that it actually has lots of depth and potential. So, but sometimes you also need someone who actually will go straight to the point to test a new build system, a new type of enemy, or a very specific boss. So you have to have someone who is at least a little bit experience with the game or with this type of game in some way. So I would say both are really important. I do tend to prefer to have fresh people to just challenge the game to its root, because for me the core loop of a game is more important than anything else. Just having the 5 first minutes really fun, that's it, job done. But things after that, it's just about metrics and stats and items and
I actually think it's kind of like I'm working as a QA as well as doing whatever, but it's my first time doing playtesting, and I think it's really fun to like playtest, and then someone faces a problem, and then you fix the problem. It's very basic, but it actually makes the game better over time if you just like listen.
Yeah, and God bless your work. But the problem is when people just don't want to fix it. They're like, oh, that the game should be like, oh, that doesn't matter, or I like it that way, and then you start like getting tunnel vision or something. And it even happens with my students. I'm like, your project would be a lot better if we could tweak this, and this. And he's like, no, I like it that way. I'm like, B+, whatever. And then in the paper, I'm like, repeatedly told you why this was bad, and you ignored me without justification other than I like it. Goodbye. Like, what can you do? There are actually technical metrics you can use to gauge things without being subjective, and you have to like be open to that as well. It's
Like
not
what?
personal ones. Like if you press the A button and your jump has like a super annoying 5-second animation and you fall off and you didn't code in Coyote time, and the floor is slippery, the jump is too floaty, but your game's not like in space to justify jumping like you're on the moon, or even like the UI is bad, the information is too small. There's so many small things that just add up, and you can immediately tell when you play. And then you tell them to fix it, and they just don't want to do it. And it's like, okay, just release your game like that. See how it goes. I tried to tell them, I'm like, you have to accept it. You have to accept that you have to fix it. Otherwise, you're just gonna be like really stubborn, and it's not gonna help you.
So yeah,
I have a specific question. Just like, I don't know, my mind goes to what I'm thinking about currently in my development. But you're doing most of your playtesting online, right?
Yes.
And on my game right now, like, we are doing the system where we invite new playtesters around every build and try to get that first-time user experience and also that veteran experience. But we've had a couple of playtesters that are like a lot even that disappear. It's like they're not interacting with us anymore. And I feel like that's, I mean, not really interact. I feel like the answer, but they don't really.
How often did you bring in new playtesters?
You're talking about Kleenex testers. Kleenex testers are also very, very important. Problem is, there's a lot of different important QA and testing. So when I say I think this one's the most important, I think I come from a place where I think that it is the type of testing that is missing most often in the games industry. But it doesn't mean that it is like, if you just have this, it will work out. You still have to do every type of testing. But it's compat testing, you have lots of different monitors and configurations, different types of hardware. You have like accessibility testing, which is like just an entire subset of its own, making sure that it works for all sorts of different types of, like vision, controller stuff, reflex things, and it's just, yeah, I think Kleenex testing is also extremely important. We do it quite often. Currently for our new unannounced project, every time we have a playtest session, I guess not really a playtest session, every time we spin up a new build for our playtesters, we try to also invite 1 or 2 people every week or every 2 weeks. So they've never played it before. And generally when we invite people, we ask that we watch while they play their first time. And then we can identify kind of like first time user experience type of issues, make sure they understand the rules immediately, how the game works immediately, like what is clear and what isn't. So that is definitely super important in the prototype phase. And then once you start smoothing out kind of like the initial tutorial kind of like work, it becomes less important over time. But it's pretty important for at least 2 years, which is pretty long. But it depends on how complex your game's rules are. But for a game like Slay, it's quite important. There's just too many systems. So, but if you're making a game in a genre that you already understand or everybody understands, then it's not as important, but it's still, you have to do it at least 5 times. Minimum 5 times, preferably 50 times. So yeah.
I have a specific question, just like, I don't know, my mind goes to what I'm thinking about currently in my development, but you're doing most of your playtesting online, right?
Yes.
And on my game right now, like, we are doing the system where we invite new playtesters around every build and try to get that first-time user experience and also that veteran experience. But we've had a couple of playtesters that are like a lot even that disappear. It's like they're not interacting with us anymore. And I feel like that's, I mean, not really interact. I feel like the answer, but they don't really play the game anymore. And I feel like I'd like to ask if that happened to you and what you made of it, because I feel like that's a portion of playtesting that could be missed, like why people stop playing the game.
That's a good point. We don't really ask why people stop playing. It's more like if people do keep playing, we're like, oh, like what do you like about it? It's like those are kind of like complex questions because they're so multifaceted, right? Like the reason somebody could start playing, keep playing, and stop playing are very complex questions. They could be like personal life events, but they could be lying to you to be polite. And we try to eliminate that kind of human element from our tests as much as possible. So if you ask extremely open-ended questions, it can be difficult to ascertain what the motive behind what they're saying. And it could just be being nice, because politeness is a huge thing in our society. I think it's a good thing, but it's not very good for getting good data to improve your game. So when people stop playing our games, we're not really sure, we're not 100% sure why. So there are some elements that are just very, very difficult to understand. It could just not be a game for them. Maybe the flow doesn't feel right. Maybe there's not enough content left. Not sure. Who knows?
9. Overlooked aspects of game development.
What would you say is the most overlooked part in development?
Overlooked part in development. I mean, probably QA. Generally QA. There's a lot of developers that come from tech. This is why you get into computer science because you want to make video games. You find out you can't get a job in the games industry, so you work in big tech. You work in big tech for a while, you quit, and then you make video games.
Classic story.
So,
classic
story, right?
I think.
So there's a lot of programmers, and they're like, I can just make the whole game. All I need to do is make the game. And then you just, over time, you just kind of forget that when you worked at the tech company, there was a QA staff, and they were preventing you from fucking everything up. But when you work for yourself and you're making an indie game, you forget that over time. You get lost in the sauce. You're making the game, you're excited, you got art, you got music. And then you're like, do I really need QA? I'm really good at my job. I don't need QA. And then it just doesn't even work, you know? And you just forget that that whole system of people existed to prevent that specifically from happening. But you just can't do that because you just kind of just took it for granted, I think. QA is taken for granted in the tech industry, even in the tech industry, just like games especially. They're like, testers, they're a dime a dozen. Everyone wants to play games and test games. In the tech industry, it's like QA is not like, it's not as important as programmers. Programmers make the thing. And so QA is always like looked down on. And it was actually a huge struggle, even when I worked at Amazon. Programmers would very constantly treat QA very poorly, or look down on them, or feel they're less important. And I pushed very, very hard when I worked at Amazon to try to get a lot of our QA staff to sit in on like architectural meetings for like programming. I like to be fly on the wall. Fly on the wall is like just like kind of being there while they're having like sprint planning. It's like if the QA knows what's coming, they can plan for it and test for it and do things. And you can't just make a thing and send it off to a team and be like, please find anything wrong. That's just not how it works. You have to tightly integrate QA into the development process. Otherwise, they're not going to know what is going to break. They're not going to be able to sense what the risks are coming on. So
yeah, we have
not having that kind of system at all is very, very dangerous.
I think, like, for example, when I joined it in 2017, there was like a kind of a prejudice against people that were working in the social media part or doing community. There were some people that would say, oh, this is not real game development. You are not like a game developer. But it's kind of like stupid for me, because it's like the person is doing the marketing for you to sell your game, to have like more people playing your game. Why you are like excluding what this person is working on, saying that, oh, this is not game development. Like, this is just like a team working to ship a product to have money, right? Like, we need money to survive. So please stop being like this, like stop, like, you know what I mean? And I think if let's say somebody's right now, like your students, making a game and they want to work with that for real, and then like there needs to be like someone doing the admin, there needs to be someone doing the social media. It can't be the same person, but like having the same person developing the game, making the art, making the music, making the sound, making the trailer, making the social media, and managing the company itself, like all these 7 roles in one person is really hard. So there are cases of like one developer made all of this stuff and took like 8 years to ship the game or even more. But this is like, it's like something special, right? Like one person took like a long time to do all this work because they decided to. But honestly, nowadays everything is so different than 10 years ago. Nowadays, like there are lots of games every day. Like lots of new games every day. There's social media, there's like lots of competition. The gaming scene is not the same as before. And now we have AI as well to make our art and other stuff, even sound effects, music. The competition is even like fierce than 10 years ago. So I think they shouldn't overlook in at least having someone to help them, like with the administration part and the social media part. Please have somebody do that because yeah, like if you make a mistake in the administrative part, it can cost you like sometimes like this, like let's say you didn't pay a tax that you needed to pay, then it can cost like thousands, you know what I mean? Like so yeah, I think like people should take the admin part more serious. Yeah, so like admin part is like essentially is the core of game development because at the end the game itself is a product and you need to manage the company really well, otherwise the product will have problems later. Like they are not separate from each other.
I'd love to ask you a bit about what you think the most overlooked aspect in a game's development is.
Probably the user experience.
Like the game design?
Like the flow of how you can have a great game design, you can have a great game loop, but it could still feel disjointed by the way that the game is kind of presented to players. And I think many games don't take the time to make sure there's proper flow with tutorialization and creating their character and going through kind of those intro steps and it so to me that's the area that I often find could be improved.
Can you usually tell during a pitch if something already starts to feel like it's flowing, like in the vertical slice of the game?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's something that can be polished later on, but when you review as many games as we do and most publishers do, you can definitely tell when a game has kind of and it just everything down from the game loop feels solid to the flow feels solid. And I think it really comes down to and this isn't the case for every game because not every game, would necessarily want to be classified as fun, but it really does come down to finding the fun, right? And there's games that can find the fun and also really just cut out that fluff and outside noise and just really they've found the fun and it's just streamlined in to focus on that, right? And there's not a lot of other stuff on the sides. There's some games where you're like, okay, I really like this element of it, but this and this are just they're not working for me, But the people who can kind of just hit you with, boom, here's what my game is. It's this mechanic. It works really well. You can see how it can expand in the future and continue to be interesting. Those are typically the games that are most attractive to us, but I also think to a lot of consumers. Another thing I'd say that a lot of games are missing is a hook. They're just we're making a Metroidvania in a sci-fi world, right? And that's not necessarily interesting and it doesn't stand out, but the game ideas that really feel okay, here's something. It's when you get the sense of oh, I haven't seen this before. This, and it doesn't need to be fully unique. Sometimes it can be blending a couple successful genres together, but it feels fresh when you look at it and when you play it.
10 tips for students.
Do you have any tips for students heading into the games industry or for students looking to build their own studio?
Build their own studio. I don't know if a student should be building their own studio.
That's a good. That's something that's good to hear. I guess
that's very brave. Just treat people well, I guess. Just tips for getting into the game industry. Generally, the advice is to be financially stable, because if you are not financially stable, then you will make a lot of creative blunders. You will start to think that what you need to do to make money and to make it, you have to implement X, Y, Z, bad practices, things like that. And I think ultimately it can make you a bad person and make bad games. So you'll lose on two fronts. You'll become a terrible human being if you try to get more and more money out of your products and then justify it to yourself by saying you have to survive. And then B, you're going to be making those bad games, and then you are going to be creatively bankrupt. And it's not good to just make those games, because the games that make a lot of money and people assume make money are kind of like psychological traps, and they have a lot of dark patterns. So just try to avoid those as much as possible. And I would much rather see a lot of game developers start off working at even a software company, not even games related. There's just a lot of overlap in those industries. If you want to get into animation, you can work as an animation assistant. You don't have to be in the games industry. And I think it's actually better if you don't work in the games industry at the start, in my opinion. You just get to see the world from a different perspective, and you can add on more to a project if you come from a different place. But just I would say see the world. It's pretty important to see the world.
Well, I would say keep in mind the project that you're doing and try not to exceed what you need. So don't try to make a huge team just because you gotta make a huge team. If you think you need a huge team, that's a harder project. So you need experience for a bigger team. So try to figure out what you actually need. Put down, list the things that you need. And then once you realize how long it's going to take you, if you realize, oh, if I did this on my own on a timeline, it's going to take me 5 years. Well, yeah, maybe work with 5 people, and then maybe it's going to take you 1 year, right? So that would be a thing. Do a timeline and some pre-production, and don't try to make something bigger just because it has to be bigger. Again, timelines usually don't get fully respected, but at least you have an idea. You start with something, and that's important. And then from there you can move around things. Try not to add too much stuff, because the more you add, the more bugs come out, the more mechanics come out, the more you have to make everything coincide with everything else. So it gets exponentially harder the more stuff you put in the game. So keep that in mind. Try to make something simple and then play it. And I guess the last thing I would suggest, really try to still have fun. As an indie, you have this possibility. So try to make a game that you still enjoy playing, if possible. Just try to still enjoy the game by the time you're done. Because if you're still enjoying the game by the time you're done, and you manage to make it in a way that new players also enjoy it, then you got the whole range. You got the range of new players that tried the game and are enjoying it, and you still like it, so you know that it has enough depth that you could play it for as long as you made it. So that's good. So, I think that's one of the most important things. Try to still have fun while making the game. You need to like it. Otherwise, it's going to be shit.
What was the most valuable lesson you learned making this game? And I'll ask you a follow-up later about your previous games. What was the most valuable lesson you learned from them as well?
Well, I think one of the most valuable things that I learned is that no matter how much you're prepared, there's always going to be, the challenges that you're going to face are always going to be in directions that you would never expect. So be prepared for that. If you think you know where the challenges are going to be, that's usually where the challenges won't be, because you think you got it under control. But there are always going to be other things that you're not going to expect, and those are going to be the real challenges.
Really interesting. Can I ask also what did you learn from your previous projects? What were the most valuable lessons you came out of development with?
Well, Riot taught me about burnout, which I didn't know it existed. Then I experienced it. So yes, it exists. Even though you think you're a superhero and you can do everything, be aware that when you burn out, life is meaningless and you don't want to do anything anymore, and it's really bad. So be careful. So that burnout is something that maybe it's more common now to know. And it's not meaning oh, I'm so tired. It means that you really overdid it to the point that your brain just kind of fries, and you're never gonna be as inspired ever again. It's really hard. So be very careful about that one. I think Riot taught me about that, and development hell That's another thing. You just can get stuck on a project forever. So be careful about that. The second game, I guess, taught me that making a game can be extremely fun. I really enjoyed that one. If you make a game with the right people and you have fun making the game, not only the game is going to come out better, but the whole process is going to be very worth it.
Yeah, like I think this is what I usually say and what I usually see my friends in the industry mentioning as well, which is like if you want to work with indie games, would be better if you at least have like 5 or 4 study games that you make, because like at least you know the process of building something from 0 to the end. Can be like small games, 30 games, but at least like try to build your own game. There are tools online that you can use, free music, free sounds, free assets, free engines. You can do whatever you want, as long as you just finish at least like 4 or 5 projects. That's something that I recommend, because that way you can check like, do I like building games, or do I like working with stuff related to games? Because for example, I made some study games and I realized I don't actually like building the game itself. It's fun, but I don't want to work with this. I don't want to do this every day. This is something that is not for me. But I really like organizing stuff, dealing with texts and numbers and spreadsheets, and dealing with social media and checking what is popular right now. I really like that kind of stuff. So like I can work with games, but not like in the development itself. But there are other people that if they make a game, they can be like, oh, I really like creating the sounds for the game. I really like creating the music for the game. Or I don't know, implementing the sounds. Like there are so many steps that you building a game, you can do it like this or that. Like you can at least have a sense of what you like and what you don't like. Just start like make your own games, your own small. Please don't not try to make like I don't know, an Overwatch game from scratch. This will not work. So please try making like at least for small study games to check what kind of stuff you like when making games. If you are working like with a team, like your friends at uni or anyone else, you can like, check with them like if you can manage the product itself. Like just like produce the game itself instead of being a developer. So yeah, making games would be a great start, I would say. What do you think? Or the teachers or you?
I think I'm in the opinion that if you want to get into the industry, it really just depends on what you want to do in the industry, because there are people who fit working in companies and there are people who don't. And if you're not, you need to understand where do I want to fit into this industry? And am I more of a solo developer? Do I want to work as part of a small team? Do I just want to make the biggest thing out there with a team? Do I just want something stable? Like there's a lot of questions you need to figure out. And the position itself, I think most people will find themselves in something they naturally either are good at doing or like doing, because we just can't stay away from it. Like if I don't like doing something, I'll find ways not to do it. And that's mostly my take.
I'm always very reluctant to give like explicit advice to other developers or studios. I'm aware that the way we make games is not necessarily typical, and that the stuff isn't always transferable. And there's an element, I think, when it comes to game development, it is art. And every artist has their own approach to how they do their craft and how they create what they want to make. And everyone kind of has to stumble their way through the process that's going to work for them, rather than just trying to wholesale take something from another studio, implement it in your studio and say, it worked for them, so it's going to work for us. It's the same, you can draw a direct analogy to that doesn't work in game design either. You can't take a mechanic straight from one game and toss it into your game and have it work. Like that mechanic is always dependent on all the other parts in the game for the game to be fun. And one element of how we run our studio is probably dependent on all the other ways that who we are and the games we make and who we work with, that it works that way. And that if you can't just transplant it somewhere else for it to work. But yes, I do believe that absolute faith in the people you're working with is important. And respecting and listening to and supporting each other is more important than whatever the final product is. It should be something everyone's pleased with by the time you get to the end. And when I hire people like Moro or a new programmer for just pure raw technical knowledge versus like Ben Prunty, our composer, if anything, Ben Prunty, our composer, complains that Jay and I don't give him enough feedback because we just trust him to make great music. And that he sometimes feels a little bit afloat in terms of how to apply what would fit for our game. Or we're like, we're not the composer. You can sort it out. We trust you. Make something awesome. And most of the time, I mean, every time, if you look at Into the Breach and FTL, his soundtracks are absolutely genius.
Amazing.
So there is an element that you just have to be like, these people you work with are talented, and you need to let them be talented and trust them to be talented.
Yeah, advice to students either looking to get into the games industry or looking to build a studio.
My number one advice when I'm asked is to be wary of advice. That's the thing I always want to push the hardest from the beginning. Like I talked about earlier already in the interview, the need to kind of sort yourself out and your own path and your own approach to this stuff, I think is incredibly important. And that their path is not applicable to everyone else's. Like, it's just, you can't copy and paste this stuff. And so any advice you do here, take with a grain of salt. And then when it comes to like the generalities that I also like are the only reason I'm in the industry is because I was willing to move to China and kind of disrupt my whole life, leave friends and family behind, and start in the industry in a weird place. I'm not saying everybody's got to move to China, but there is a certain amount of, it's not going to be the path you expect. You're not going to be able to just do exactly what you want to do and you picture in your mind. It's going to be a certain amount of, if you want to make games or you want to do anything in your life, you need to be able to roll with the punches and kind of chase down the opportunities where they are, even if they aren't exactly what you always wanted to do. As well as the other element that I was already discussing in terms of trusting your team and whoever you're working with, as well as like really respecting them and their time and their emotional state or health state or whatever it might be. That you can't work in a team if you're not all supporting one another and you're not trusting one another. And that's been a big part of Subset Games' success, I think, is that we are lucky enough to be in a position that we all do that.
Do you have any tips for students heading into the games industry, either as a worker or people trying to build their own studio?
I feel like I sprinkled some gems of that in the other questions. So I'm trying to find like,
you can repeat yourself. That's fine.
The strongest gem, like the the priceless gem.
It's okay if your mom doesn't like your game. Only you have to like your game.
That's a really good one. Yeah, screw parents.
Screw your friends too, because listen, like your friends, sometimes they just don't like it, but you know, it's fine. Your friends don't have to like your game. Just find the people that like it. And if you can't find anyone, then you should not make that game. Or should not try to sell it.
I'll put the part where you say that students go, yeah, this is just my vision and no one gets it, and they're wrong. And
that's not what I said. That's not what I said.
And then I'll put this part where you say, fuck everyone else. No one else matters.
That's
just
not what I'm
opinion.
trying to say. My God. It's like, don't let the people that you know be the judge. Evil. No, like,
no, not
the
you,
problem
him.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you put too much weight on the people you know, but remember that you're not making your game for your friends. You're making your game for the people that like that type of game. So don't let yourself get swayed. Like, if your classmate doesn't like your game, that's fine. Like, is your classmate even your demographic? Like, care about the people that should like your game. If they don't like it, something's wrong, right? Like, you're making a horror game and a horror YouTuber is like, this game is mid. Why is the game mid? Like, what's happening? He should like it. It's a horror game. What's happening, right? Like, look for feedback in the right places, I think is what I'm trying to say.
And the second one, I would say, do game jams. I can't say that from really personal experience, but I've felt and I've seen exactly the same things making games for years than making games for 40 hours. It's absolutely exactly the same thing. There really no difference between them. So if you want to learn really like the fast way, if you make multiple game jams, you will learn from your failures at the fastest possible rate and without involving and taking risk, too much risk. You're just losing 48 hours or 1 week of your life and that's it. And you will experiment and you will learn quickly how to make a platformer, how to make an FPS or an action game or something. So game jams really like the short summary of game making. It's like a cheat code of game making. Yeah, I think that everything else will be just survive to your failures. So it's really okay to fail as long as you're okay with that. And you will learn much more from your failures than your success. So, yeah.
Recommend students do?
Yeah, actually, make small games. Like, make small projects and try to make them look good and be fun to play. And, you know, you can get experimental. It's always fun. But really focus on making games that are kind of impressive for how just finished they are, basically. Like, make a complete game that you could buy for like $1 or $2, right? And then I think, in my opinion, that would really help you get hired if that's what you want. Or if you want to go the indie way, which is honestly kind of risky when when you were students just like a few months ago. But if you want to go the indie way, having the experience of making finished games is really important, even if those games are really small. It's such a difficult skill set to master, to finish a game, market it, do support for it. It's something that you don't often get the chance to practice for. So yeah, I think it's a really good exercise.
How important do you think it is to surround yourself with other developers?
Honestly, I would not say it's important. I think it's crucial. Like it's like a life and death situation. You know, I would take my situation as an illustration of that. I'm working alone. I mean, I'm developing my games by myself. I do have an artist for a few visual questions. Most of the day-to-day decisions and stuff I do it by myself. But still, at my co-work space, I do work with another developer who is also making games, and we are approximately same age, so same life situation in general. We are not making the same game at all. We are just two separate companies, but being able to just talk to someone who actually understands your questions, it's actually super important. If you are a game designer and you have any kind of game designer friend, you should absolutely get closer to this person just to be able to discuss between we take a coffee and we discuss about that. It's not your game, but you have a good idea what good game design is. We all share these same questions, small companies, indie projects. And so when we ask a question, we know that these people will know. Probably they will understand your issue. Maybe it's marketing company issue, but also game design or art questions. So yeah, just keep in touch with a bunch of people who actually really share your day-to-day issues.
I think I have 2 more questions. Ilay, you said you had a question?
I want the final question.
Okay, you'll get the final question.
Final development stories.
How big was the team when, at its height?
I'd say 6 is the max that we were working at the same time. So that's why the game took 3 years to make. It's very small.
How many days did you work a week?
All days a week. It's not healthy, so that's why my next game hasn't come out, because I decided to take care of myself. It was like wake up at 5, go to bed at 2. It was awful. And the worst part is my students don't believe me, and I see them crunching all the time. I'm like, no, you're gonna get sick. I got sick a lot. I lost a lot of weight, lost a lot of sleep, which should not be normal, but it is normal for people making it. Yeah.
Ilay had a bad experience with crunching for 18-hour days during 1 month and just collapsing.
Oh yeah, it sucks, but I feel like it's necessary sometimes. I mean, I'm not for it in general, but I feel like if you have something that's meaningful to you, you can sacrifice some of your mental and physical state for a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, when it goes on
for
for
6 months.
Six months is way too much. I feel like a month or two is the limit, and then you have some recuperating period, and you can do that again.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you don't need to.
Bug Fables is a miracle. It got done because I was young. Because I would probably die if I pulled the same hours again. I cannot do it. I think it's like a rite of passage, right? Where you're like, yeah, I can't do this again. Like, I'm an adult now. No more crunch. Like, the game can just take 5 years.
Yeah, I feel like when you're young, you have this mindset of like, I've only got this one chance, and I'm gonna do everything for it, and then it's half true.
Yeah, it's half true. It's not true at all, but it feels that way. But it's very humbling as well because you see all these stories. I try not to suffer from success bias. There's a lot of developers that pull those hours, and the game doesn't make it. And then what are you left with? So you should always have some humbleness and be like, is it really worth it to destroy myself for like a risk? It's like going to the casino, to be honest.
Why do you think a bunch of games like don't reach the finish line? Like, why do you think most games fail before the finish line?
When you say before the finish line, do you mean they get cancelled?
Release.
Or they release and
No, they don't get to release. They start development, they're mid-production, and they just stop somewhere in that line of development starts and launch. Somewhere in between that, they just get cancelled.
There's so many reasons that could happen. One could be mismanagement, where you underestimate the scope of your product. That happens a lot with Kickstarter games, so I'm glad I didn't end up there. Where the graph I told you about, with like how much you need and how long you need, you just underestimate it, and then it ends up being more than you can predict.
Was it an underestimation in your project?
Surprisingly, no. However, when we did the beta testing, our game was so broken that we had to delay. We're like, guys, we cannot release the game like this. Can you give us like 3 months, please? They're like, okay. I was like, I'll never ask for anything again. And then I asked for a lot of stuff again. Yeah, you can't predict that, and you can get sick. Indie titles they have a weakness to a teammate getting sick for like 2 weeks, and then the whole project dies. So if it's an indie game, that could happen. You could get depressed in the middle. You could realize the game is bad, which I don't want to like pretend like your game is bad, but sometimes you're working on the game and you're like, fuck, this game sucks. Like, why do we spend so long on this? And then they just cancel, which I have seen happen. They were just like, the art is great, but it's not fun. So we should just cut our losses. And sometimes it's just tragedy with it. Someone gets depressed, they just can't do it anymore. Or the crunch gets to them and they're like, I don't want to do it.
What do you think people can do to mitigate that? Like, save the project?
So I honestly think that what we did was a great way to mitigate that, because we had the demo, right? We could show it around. We could figure out if people liked it, if we were on the right track. We kept an open mind. Sometimes criticism like destroys you, but you need to take it, so you can't be too negative. I think being able to show your game and be like, people like it, is very useful to get you to the finish line. So if you work on a project in secret for like 5 years and no one has played it, sometimes you need a little pat on the back. So don't keep it too close to your heart. My students are like, I don't want to share my game because they'll steal it. I'm like, no, they fucking making game takes years. It's gonna steal your game. Don't be stupid. Yeah, just get it out there. And also, plan, and then after you plan, add like 6 months to that. And if you can't do it, then just don't do it. Wait a bit longer or save up for a bit longer. Don't be so hasty, I guess is my advice. It's a half truth, right? You don't have to do it when you're like 23. I think Night in the Woods got done by a guy in his 40s or something. You have your whole life ahead of you.
What was your first year of development like? Do you have any experience beforehand, or was FTL your first ever attempt at a big project?
It was our first attempt at a project on our own. Both Jay and I worked at 2K Games in Shanghai, which is where we met. It was my first job out of university. I wanted to get into the game industry, and every programmer in the US anyway wants to get into the game industry, it feels like. And so it was a challenge to do that. And my willingness to move out to China and join the 2K China studio was an opportunity for me to get in my foot in the door that was actually possible. And so I ended up there, which is where I met Jay. I wasn't at 2K for very long, probably only about 2 years before we left and started just poking at side projects and other things, and FTL kind of came out of it. The first year was very pleasant. It was very easy. It was amazing amount of just getting to wake up and work for yourself on your own ideas was an amazing shift from the studio. Living in China is incredibly affordable. So you can live on what meager savings I had quite easily when you're in Shanghai because of the cost of living. Though toward the end of the project, my now wife was also fortunately available to be helpful and to still have a job to cover rent in the months before the Kickstarter launched. But mostly, yeah, it was not a particularly stressful development, and it all came together far better than it should have and ever had any right to. We really did just feel like we got lucky and stumbled into something that now that I've done more development since and seen how painful development can be, like Into the Breach was a long, drawn out, difficult process. And our current prototypes have been long, drawn out, difficult processes. And so FTL fell together in such a wonderful way that it will always be probably a highlight in terms of what game development can be like.
How long was FTL in development for?
Beginning to end probably only took about 18 months.
Really? You're the
Yeah.
third guy telling me 18 months, you know? People, apparently 18 months is like a good amount of time for a game.
I guess if it's a small game and the concept works pretty much from the beginning, then it's all you need to flesh it out. And to be fair, when you talk about FTL today, there's the advanced edition content, and that took us another, probably another year of work to do all the new events, all the new ships, all the new systems, all the new elements that we put into the advanced edition. And so the final product that you buy and play today is more like 2.5 years of development. But still, compare that to Into the Breach, which was nearly a 5-year project. So we went from 18 months to 5 years, and it was
quite a difference.
Quite a difference, yeah.
Hang on, I'll lift my cat. She either wants food or to be lifted, and I feel like lifting her. Unrelated to the interview, like you managed to launch FTL on Steam before Steam Greenlight, before a bunch of the...
Yeah, we were very lucky. Again, common thread for the conversation will be we were very lucky, and that is something that I will say a lot. When it comes to Steam specifically, what had happened is that FTL had a Kickstarter about 8 months, I think, before we launched, and it did much better than we expected, and that drew the attention of the press because we happened to launch our Kickstarter within 2 weeks, a week of Double Fine's Kickstarter for their
Broken Age.
Yeah, Broken Age. And that one drew in like $2 million or $3 million or some ridiculous number, and it got all the gaming press talking about Kickstarter and talking about Broken Age. And then Kickstarter in the like beneath the project says, here's other projects you might like. And at the time, Kickstarter didn't really have a lot of video games on it. We were an oddity, and so we were always listed right there on this incredibly successful Kickstarter. And so we were driven a hell of a lot more traffic than we ever expected to. And also because of that, the press had eyeballs on it more than we expected to. And so by the time we finished the Kickstarter and it was a success and we were lining up for release, Steam, I wasn't actually involved with it. Jay met with them in GDC that same year. And Steam was like, you don't even have to ask. Like, of course, you guys can be on Steam because of the success of the Kickstarter and the press we were already getting. And yeah, it's ridiculous because during that time, we were like the only game that launched on the day that we launched. And there were like 1 or 2 other games that launched in the same week that we launched, as opposed to the 100 games that come out a day or whatever dumb number it is now on Steam.
Okay.
Now it's time for my question, the last question.
Yeah.
How do you slay the spire?
How do you slay the spire? Well, you see, I don't know if you can. I don't know. It's not really a metaphor. It's just a silly name for the game. Maybe we'll find out in the future. It's you know, even as somebody who made the game, I don't really know how to slay the spire. But we just wanted to give a very nonsensical game title because roguelikes need what is it called? It's called a motivator. I call them motivators, and it's like, what are you trying to accomplish when you play the game? And if anybody asks, then it's funny because the title is called SlaytheSpire. Like, I mean, obviously you're trying to slay the spire. I mean, you're killing the heart of the spire. Is that slaying it? I don't know. It's too deep for me.
Anyway, that's nice.
That was a good final question.